On a Wednesday morning in Miami, the city inspector told Daniel he might shut down his whole building while pointing at a patch of mold that the tenant had left behind, and while saying it, the man added that some landlords should not be allowed near drywall, which stung more than the possible fine. So when the inspector finally left with a stack of photos and a warning, Daniel stayed alone in the ruined one-bedroom, breathing bleach fumes and resentment and thinking that this stupid apartment might be the thing that finally broke his finances. He went to the bedroom closet to check if the leak had spread, pushed aside a warped shoe rack and a pile of thrift store hangers, and that was when he noticed that the plywood floor at the back did not look like factory work at all. Since a strip of gray canvas had been crudely hand-sewn over it, the stitches uneven and knotted like someone had done it in a hurry after watching a how-to video only once. With the sense that anything hidden costs either time or money, he knelt despite the sticky dust on his jeans, took the box cutter he always kept in his back pocket, and sliced along the seam, feeling the blade bump over staples until the canvas sagged open and a hard rectangle dropped against his knuckles, heavier than it had any right to be. He pulled out what looked like a fake hardcover book, with cheap imitation leather and painted gold edges and a metal lip where the pages should be, and as soon as he tried the tiny latch and felt how stubbornly it refused to move under his thumb, Daniel understood that whatever this tenant had tried to hide was not a forgotten paperback, and he also understood that for the first time that week, the apartment might be about to offer him something other than bad news. Carrying the fake book in a reusable grocery bag toward the elevator, Daniel almost escaped clean until the building manager, Marta, appeared from the stairwell holding a clipboard and a coffee, glanced at the bag sagging with that strange weight, and said in her straight-to-the-point way that if he had found anything dangerous or valuable in there, management needed to log it, because the last thing they wanted was a lawsuit from some ex-tenant or their family. He answered too fast that it was just junk, some old books and metal scraps, and as he spoke he felt the lie hang in the humid air between them while her eyes measured his voice more than his words. Yet after a tense second she shrugged, reminded him that the mold pictures were going to the city, and walked off toward another unit, leaving him in the corridor, heart racing over a $10 fake book that suddenly felt like contraband. Back at his small condo in Little Havana, with his teenage daughter Sophia in the next room complaining about homework and Wi-Fi speed, he put the fake book on the kitchen table, grabbed a flathead screwdriver and a cheap hammer, and tried to pry the lock open. But the thin metal bent and his hand slipped so hard that he smashed his knuckles on the edge, making him curse under his breath and press his fingers to stop the sting as a line of red appeared. Since brute force was not working and the last thing he wanted was to explain sparks to a cranky neighbor, he took out his worn cordless drill, wedged the book against the table leg, and slowly bored a hole near the latch, metal shavings spinning onto the laminate like dull glitter until finally the bit broke through. The screwdriver dug in with better leverage, and with a loud snap that echoed in the cramped kitchen, the latch surrendered and the fake book creaked open just enough for something inside to shift with a soft plastic tap that did not sound like coins at all. When he lifted the metal door all the way, Daniel saw three things nestled in the hollowed-out space. A small black USB-shaped device with a swivel cover and the word ledger printed on it, a plain white envelope thick with a folded sheet inside, and a rubber-banded stack of thermal paper receipts already fading at the edges, none of which resembled the miracle cash he secretly hoped for, yet all of which felt more serious than the usual junk he pulled out of vacated closets. He picked up the ledger first and rolled it in his fingers, noticing the surprising weight of the brushed metal and the two tiny buttons beside the dead screen, and he remembered late-night news stories where some experts said that people stored fortunes on little sticks like this, then lost everything because of a forgotten password, which made him set it down more carefully than he expected from a landlord who spent his days hauling toilets up stairwells. The envelope crackled when he unfolded the paper, and inside he found 24 words written in shaky block letters, each numbered, random everyday English words that meant nothing together. Yet he had seen enough videos in his social feeds to recognize a seed phrase, the kind that turned a meaningless list into the key to invisible money. So he refolded it with a sudden tightness in his chest and slid it back before his fingers could smudge anything. The receipts were from a crypto exchange in San Francisco, dated between 2014 and 2018, each showing bank transfers in modest dollar amounts and credits of something labeled BTC in fractions and holes that looked small until he opened his old laptop, typed current Bitcoin price into the search bar, waited out the laggy connection, and then did rough multiplication in his head that made him push the chair back from the table, because even if only a portion of those purchases were still sitting In that wallet, the total would be more than he had ever seen in any of his accounts at once, which was exactly when the second screen on the ledger lit up and asked for a PIN code he did not have, dragging him back from fantasy to the problem sitting right in front of him. All afternoon he worked between tenant calls with the safe book nudging his thoughts, and finally, while the sun slid behind the neighboring buildings, he typed the tenant's full name and the email printed on the receipts into his browser, finding first an abandoned Twitter account filled with tech jokes, then a LinkedIn page that stopped updating years ago, and then, with a sick drop in his gut, a short local news article about a cyclist killed by a truck near Biscayne, with the same name and roughly the same face as the man from the lease photo, which suggested that whoever had hidden this arrangement under the closet floor might never come back to claim it. He sat there listening to the old fridge hum, thinking that the story would be simple if the guy were alive, because he could just hand everything over and go back to arguing about plumbing. But death made everything blurry, and the idea of treating this as abandoned property collided with the picture in the article of a man in a reflective vest who probably never imagined that some landlord would one day argue over his secret savings in front of a computer. The next morning, too restless to pretend this was normal, he booked a cheap consultation with a small lawyer in Coral Gables who specialized in landlord issues, and in a cramped office that smelled like dust and burned coffee, he explained that an ex-tenant had left behind access to digital assets, that he had tried basic searches and found what looked like an obituary, and that he wanted to know where the line between abandoned and stolen sat in a world where the keys were 24 words. On paper. The lawyer frowned, tapped his pen, and finally said that the law on leftover sofas and boxes was clear but the part about crypto was not, explaining that if Daniel made a good faith effort to locate heirs, documented everything, declared any use of those funds for taxes, and kept records that showed he had not just grabbed and run, a court might see him as acting reasonably, although no one could promise that some cousin or sibling would not show up one day and accuse him of taking what was not his, which meant that any decision here would be less about perfect legality and more about what kind of risk he could live with. Armed with that uneasy advice, Daniel called his old friend Gabriel, who worked around the crypto crowd in Brickell, and asked him to meet at a noisy cafe where startup people were glued to laptops, and when they sat down with the ledger and the receipts between their coffee cups, he laid out the story in a low voice, leaving out the exact dollar figures but admitting that this was not lunch money, which made Gabriel raise his eyebrows and say that before anyone fantasized about cashing out, they had to verify whether anything actually sat on the addresses linked to those purchase records. Using transaction IDs from the receipts, Gabriel showed him how to paste them into a blockchain explorer, and soon the screen filled with a chain of entries showing coins moving in and out over the years until they settled on a final address that still held a balance which, converted at current prices, made Daniel feel both giddy and nauseated, and Gabriel said that if the seed phrase in that envelope matched the original wallet, then Daniel was temporarily standing in front of a pile of value that people had gone to extreme lengths to secure, sometimes even more than their bank accounts. That night, back in his condo with Sophia at a friend's place, Daniel closed all other tabs, connected the ledger to his own laptop, installed the official app, and, following a guide he had triple-checked, created a fresh wallet using the 24 words, typing them slowly with shaking hands and checking each one twice until the software finally synced and displayed a balance that matched what they had seen on the Explorer, not numbers on someone else's site but an amount sitting under his control, shining on his dull old screen like any other account, yet carrying the weight of a dead tenant's decision. Instead of moving anything immediately, he printed transaction histories, wrote down the addresses, put the seed phrase into a new envelope with the date and a note that said property of former tenant of Unit 3B, heirs unknown. Then over the next few days he sent letters to the emergency contact named on the lease and to one possible relative from the accident article, used certified mail so he could stash the receipts in a folder, notified the building manager in a vague way that some items belonging to the deceased might exist and that he was holding them pending contact, and only after weeks passed with no reply, no phone calls, and no claim from anyone at all did he move a portion of the coins to pay off high-interest loans on the building, while sending the rest to a separate wallet that he mentally labeled as the tenant reserve in case someone eventually stepped out of the past and asked what had happened to the savings hidden under that closet. In the months that followed, nothing dramatic happened. No detectives at the door and no tearful relatives in the lobby. Only quieter changes, like the way his monthly anxiety eased when the worst debts disappeared and the way he could finally replace the failing fridge and the flickering kitchen light without doing math in his head for 3 days first, And when Sophia noticed that home felt less fragile and asked him directly where the money had come from, he told her the whole story at the same kitchen table, from the inspector shaming him over mold to the canvas on the closet floor, the hardware wallet, the dead cyclist, and the folder of certified mail receipts that lived now in the back of his filing cabinet. She listened with a seriousness that caught him off guard, then said that she liked that he had tried to find the family instead of just cashing out in secret, and that maybe the fairest thing was what he had done, to pull the money out of the hole it was trapped in, fix what needed fixing so their own life did not collapse, and still keep a share untouched in case someone ever knocked with proof that they had known the man who rode a bike along Biscayne before a truck ended that route, which was more ethics than most people on her feed seemed to show. The building kept aging, tenants moved in and out, the city inspector returned eventually and this time found fresh paint instead of mold, and every time Daniel opened a new empty closet in a vacated unit, he checked the floor and the shelves with a different eye. Not because he expected another jackpot, but because he now understood that people sometimes bury their last hope in ridiculous places like fake books under plywood, counting on a future self that never arrives, and that occasionally a stranger will be forced to decide whether to leave that hope rotting in the dark or bring it up into daylight and live with the consequences. For Daniel, the discovery never fully stopped feeling strange, yet it shifted something in how he saw his work, since being a landlord had always meant dealing with leftover furniture, forgotten photos, and unclaimed mail, but now it also meant that once, in one unit on the third floor, he had quietly inherited the responsibility for another man's digital ghost and had done his flawed best to respect both the law and his own conscience, walking the hallway past that door with the awareness that, behind wallpaper and wood, apartments remember more than anyone expects, even when the only witness is a tired man who came in to scrape mold and walked out carrying a secret weight in a grocery bag.